The stage lurched to a stop outside Madisonville, Texas, and Emmeline Thornton stumbled down the steps with shaking legs. Her Eastern silk dress, already clinging to her skin in the brutal June heat of 1873. She had traveled 3 weeks from Boston to claim an inheritance she never knew existed, a small ranch left by a distant uncle, but one look at the dusty streets and weathered buildings told her she had made a terrible mistake. The driver tossed her trunk to the ground without ceremony and was gone before she could even ask where to find lodging, leaving her standing alone on the side of the road with the sun beating down mercilessly on her fair skin. She managed to drag her trunk only a few feet before her vision swam. The corset she wore, appropriate for Boston society but suffocating in this heat, made every breath a struggle. Black spots danced across her eyes as she gripped the handle of her trunk, determined not to collapse in the middle of the street like some helpless child. But her body had other ideas, and her knees buckled just as strong hands caught her shoulders. "Easy now, miss," a deep voice said, steadying her. "You need to get out of this sun." Emmeline blinked up at the man who had caught her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of strong coffee. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, and he wore the practical clothing of someone who made his living outdoors. Dust covered his boots and the lower half of his denim pants, and a bandana hung loosely around his neck. He could not have been much older than she was, perhaps 25 to her 22 years. "I am quite all right," she said, though her voice came out weak and breathless. "You are about 2 minutes from heatstroke," he replied, his tone matter of fact rather than condescending. "When did you last drink water?" She could not remember. The stage had stopped only briefly, and she had been too nervous about her destination to think about such things. The man studied her face for a moment, then made a decision. "Come on. The boarding house is just down the street, but you would not make it walking. Wait here." He left her leaning against a hitching post and disappeared around the corner of the nearest building. Emmeline tried to gather her scattered thoughts, tried to make sense of this strange place she had come to, but the heat made thinking impossible. The man returned leading a gentle-looking mare, dappled gray and white with kind eyes. "This is Clementine," he said. "She will get you where you need to go without any fuss." "I cannot ride," Emmeline protested. "I have never been on a horse in my life." "Then today is full of new experiences for you." He lifted her trunk with one hand as though it weighed nothing and secured it behind the saddle. Then he turned to her, his expression patient. "I am going to help you up. Just hold onto the saddle horn, that knob right there in front, and trust that Clementine knows what she is doing." His hands circled her waist, and before she could voice another protest, he lifted her onto the horse's back. The world tilted sickeningly, and she clutched the saddle horn with both hands, her heart pounding. The mare shifted beneath her but did not move otherwise, standing perfectly still as though she understood her rider's fear. "I have you," the man said, taking Clementine's reins. "Just breathe. We are only going a short distance." He began to walk, leading the mare down the dusty street at a slow, even pace. Emmeline sat rigid in the saddle, terrified of falling, but gradually she realized the horse's movements were gentle and rhythmic. The man glanced back at her occasionally, checking that she was still upright, but he did not rush or show any impatience with her inexperience. "I am Quinn Quade," he said over his shoulder. "I work at the Double Bar Ranch just outside town. What brings a city lady to Madisonville?" "Emmeline Thornton," she managed, trying to find her voice again. "I inherited property here, the old Thornton place if you know it." Quinn's steps faltered for just a moment. "I know it. That is the spread that borders the north edge of the Double Bar, your Uncle Jacob's land. You knew him." "Not well. He kept to himself mostly, but he was a fair neighbor. I am sorry for your loss, Miss Thornton. They reached the boarding house, a two-story structure that looked sturdy enough but could not compare to the elegant hotels of Boston. Quinn tied Clementine to the rail and helped Emmeline down, his hands steady and sure. Her legs nearly gave out again when her feet touched the ground, and he kept one hand at her elbow until she found her balance. "Thank you, Mr. Quade," she said, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. "I apologize for being such a burden." "No burden," he replied, already lifting her trunk. "Let us get you inside and get some water in you before you worry about anything else." The boarding house proprietor, a weathered woman named Mrs. Henderson, took one look at Emmeline's pale face and immediately began fussing over her. Quinn carried the trunk upstairs to the room Mrs. Henderson indicated, then returned to find Emmeline sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of cool water pressed to her forehead. "You need lighter clothes," Mrs. Henderson was saying. "That get-up might work back east, but it will kill you here. I have some things that might fit you, left behind by previous boarders. Nothing fancy but practical." "I could not impose," Emmeline started, but the older woman waved her off. "Nonsense. You will pay me back by not dying of heatstroke under my roof. Bad for business." Despite the gruff words, her eyes were kind. Quinn lingered by the door, his hat in his hands. "Miss Thornton, when you are feeling better, you should come out to the double bar. My boss, Mr. Garrett, would want to talk to you about your property. There are some matters about water rights and boundary lines that you should know about." "I appreciate that," Emmeline said, managing a small smile. "You have been very kind." He nodded and settled his hat back on his head. "Get some rest. This country takes some getting used to, but it is not as harsh as it seems at first. You will find your footing." With that, he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden porch outside. Mrs. Henderson brought her a simple meal of bread, cold chicken, and fresh vegetables, and Emmeline ate mechanically, her mind still reeling from the journey and the heat and the strange encounter with Quinn Quade. After she had eaten and changed into a lighter cotton dress that Mrs. Henderson provided, she lay down on the narrow bed and fell into an exhausted sleep. She woke to the sound of roosters crowing and early morning light filtering through the thin curtains. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and panic seized her chest. Then the memories returned, along with the reality of her situation. She was in Texas, impossibly far from everything she had ever known, with only a piece of land she had never seen, and no clear idea of what to do next. The lawyer's letter had been brief and to the point. Jacob Thornton had died without issue, and as his closest living relative, she was his sole heir. The property consisted of a ranch house, several outbuildings, and approximately 300 acres of grazing land. There were no debts against the property, and a small sum of money had been left in trust for maintenance. It had seemed like Providence when she received the letter, an escape from a life that had become unbearable after her father's death left her dependent on the charity of relatives, who made their resentment clear at every turn. Now, looking out at the unfamiliar landscape visible through her window, she wondered if she had simply exchanged one impossible situation for another. She dressed carefully in the borrowed clothes, a simple calico dress that was far plainer than anything she had owned in Boston, and went downstairs. Mrs. Henderson was already up, preparing breakfast for her few boarders. "You have better color this morning," the older woman observed. "Sit down and eat. You will need your strength if you are planning to look at that property of yours." "I suppose I should," Emmeline said, though the thought of getting back on a horse made her stomach clench. "Is it far?" "About an hour's ride. You could take a wagon, but the road is rough." "Easier on horseback if you can manage it." Mrs. Henderson paused, studying her. That Quad boy said you never rode before. That true? I am afraid so. In Boston we had carriages. Well, you are going to need to learn if you plan to stay out here. Horses are not optional in this country. She set a plate of eggs and bacon in front of Emmeline. Eat up, and then we will see about getting you sorted. My son Tom can take you out to the property this afternoon if you like. He knows the area well enough. But before Mrs. Henderson could say more, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to reveal Quinn Quade, looking even taller in the doorway. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his shirt fresh and his face newly shaved, though dust still clung to his boots. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," he said politely. "I came to see if Miss Thornton might need an escort out to her property. I have the morning free, and I know the land well." Mrs. Henderson glanced at Emmeline with raised eyebrows, and Emmeline felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "That is very thoughtful of you, Mr. Quad," she said carefully, "but I would not want to impose on your time. No imposition. Like I said yesterday, there are things you should know about the property, and it is better to discuss them on site where you can see what I am talking about." His expression was open and honest, with no hint of anything improper in his suggestion. Emmeline found herself nodding before she had fully thought it through. "Very well, thank you. I will bring a horse for you, same one as yesterday if that suits you. Clementine is patient with beginners." He touched the brim of his hat and was gone again before Emmeline could respond. Mrs. Henderson chuckled as she closed the door. "That boy has always been a gentleman. His family has been in these parts for 20 years, good people. You could do worse for a guide." An hour later, Emmeline found herself once again sitting on Clementine's back, though this time she was dressed more appropriately and had eaten a proper breakfast. Quinn had brought his own horse, a tall bay gelding named Copper, and he rode beside her rather than leading her mare. The difference was significant. Sitting in the saddle felt less terrifying now, and she found herself able to look around at the landscape rather than simply clinging on in fear. The land around Madisonville was a mix of rolling grassland and scattered oak trees, with the occasional creek cutting through the terrain. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, bigger than any sky she had ever seen in Boston, and the air smelled of grass and earth, and something wild she could not name. It was beautiful in a way she had not expected, harsh and unforgiving but also strangely compelling. Quinn rode easily, clearly at home in the saddle, and he pointed out landmarks as they went. "That ridge to the north, that is the boundary of your land. The creek we are following that runs through both your property and the double bar. Water rights are shared, but we need to make sure the agreement is documented properly." "I know nothing about ranching," Emmeline admitted. "I am not sure what I am supposed to do with this land." "What do you want to do with it?" Quinn asked, glancing at her with genuine curiosity. She had not expected the question. No one in Boston had ever asked her what she wanted. Decisions had always been made for her, first by her father and then by the relatives who took her in. "I am not sure," she said slowly. "I suppose I thought I would sell it and use the money to establish myself somewhere. But now that I am here, I find myself wondering if there might be another option. You could run cattle. The land is good for grazing, and your uncle had a small herd. I do not know what happened to them after he passed, but they might still be around. Or you could lease the grazing rights to someone else and collect rent. There are options." They crested a small rise, and Quinn pulled Copper to a stop. "There it is, the Thornton place." Emmeline looked down at the property she had inherited and felt her breath catch. The ranch house was small but solidly built, constructed of weathered wood with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. Several outbuildings stood nearby, including a barn, a chicken coop, and what looked like a storage shed. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze, pumping water into a large trough. The land around the buildings rolled away in gentle waves, dotted with oak trees and crossed by the creek they had been following. It was not grand or imposing. It could not compare to the fine houses of Boston's wealthy families. But something about it spoke to her, a sense of possibility that she had not felt in years. "Can we go closer?" she asked. Quinn nodded and urged Copper forward. As they approached, Emmeline could see that the property had been neglected since her uncle's death. Weeds grew tall around the buildings, and one of the corral fences had fallen into disrepair. But the bones of the place were good, the structures sound. Quinn helped her down from Clementine, and she walked slowly toward the house. The door was unlocked, and she pushed it open cautiously. Inside, dust covered everything, but she could see the simple furnishings her uncle had left behind. A table and chairs, a wood-burning stove, a narrow bed in the corner. Shelves lined one wall, still holding a few books and dishes. "It needs work," Quinn said from the doorway. "But it is a good, solid house. Your uncle built it himself, did most of the work alone. He was a capable man, just preferred his own company." Emmeline ran her finger along the dusty table, imagining the life her uncle must have led here. Solitary but independent, answerable to no one. "I think I understand why he stayed," she said softly. They spent the next hour walking the property, with Quinn explaining the layout and pointing out both the assets and the problems. The barn needed a new roof. The windmill was functioning but required maintenance. The fences needed repair in several places. It was overwhelming, but Emmeline found herself listening carefully, trying to absorb as much information as she could. "There are about 20 head of cattle that still carry your uncle's brand," Quinn said as they stood by the creek. "They have been grazing on open range, but they are legally yours. You would need help bringing them in and managing them, but it could be the start of rebuilding the herd." "How would I even begin to do that?" Emmeline asked, feeling the weight of her ignorance. "I do not know the first thing about cattle or ranching." Quinn was quiet for a moment, gazing out at the land. "You could hire help, or you could learn. It is not easy work, but it is not impossible either. Plenty of people come out here not knowing anything and figure it out as they go." "Did you grow up ranching?" "My father was a ranch hand, worked for the double bar before me. I grew up in the saddle, helping with cattle drives before I was tall enough to see over a cow's back. But I have seen plenty of people learn later in life. It is more about determination than anything else." Emmeline looked at the land again, really looked at it, trying to imagine herself building a life here. It terrified her, but it also stirred something in her chest, a feeling she slowly recognized as hope. "If I decided to stay to try to make this work, would you help me? I could pay you for your time, for lessons in riding and ranching." Quinn turned to look at her, his dark eyes searching her face. "Why would you want to stay?" "You could sell this place and go back to Boston, live comfortably on the proceeds." "There is nothing for me in Boston," she said, the words coming out more honestly than she had intended. "My father died 2 years ago and left debts I could not pay. I have been living on the charity of relatives who remind me daily that I am a burden. This land, this place, it is the first thing I have had that is truly mine. I know it is foolish. I know I am completely unprepared for this life, but I cannot help thinking that maybe I could build something here. Something that belongs to me." The silence stretched between them, and Emmeline wondered if she had said too much, revealed too much of her desperate circumstances to this near stranger. But when Quinn spoke, his voice was gentle. "It is not foolish, and yes, I will help you. Not for pay, but because it is the right thing to do. Neighbors help each other out here, that is how we all survive. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I would like to see what you can make of this place. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. "Thank you," she whispered. "First thing you need to learn is how to really ride," Quinn said, all business now. "Sitting in the saddle while the horse walks is one thing, but you need to be able to control your mount to feel confident. We will start with that." Over the next weeks, Quinn became a constant presence in Emmeline's life. He came to the boarding house each morning and rode out with her to the property, patiently teaching her how to handle Clementine. At first, every muscle in her body ached from the unfamiliar exercise, and she was certain she would never develop the easy grace that Quinn displayed in the saddle. But gradually, day by day, it became easier. He taught her how to guide the mare with subtle pressure from her legs, how to shift her weight to help the horse navigate uneven ground, how to read Clementine's ears and understand what the animal was thinking. He never lost patience with her mistakes, never made her feel foolish for her inexperience. Instead, he encouraged every small success and offered gentle corrections when she went wrong. "You are thinking too much," he said one morning as she struggled to get Clementine to turn smoothly. "Trust your instincts. Feel what the horse is doing and respond to it. You are partners, not adversaries." Emmeline took a breath and tried to clear her mind of all the instructions she had been trying to follow. She focused instead on the feeling of Clementine beneath her, the rhythm of the mare's movement, the warm Texas sun on her shoulders. When she asked for the turn this time, it came naturally, smoothly, and she felt a surge of triumph. "That is it," Quinn said, and the approval in his voice made her smile wider than the accomplishment itself. Between riding lessons, they worked on the property. Quinn helped her clean out the house, haul away debris, and make a list of necessary repairs. He brought tools from the double bar and taught her how to mend fences, how to check the windmill for proper function, how to care for the few chickens that had apparently survived on their own since her uncle's death. "These birds are tougher than they look," he said, scattering feed while the chickens clucked around his feet. "They have been fending for themselves for months." Emmeline found herself laughing at the antics of the hens, something she had not done freely in longer than she could remember. Quinn glanced at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. He looked away quickly, focusing on the chickens again, but the moment lingered between them. She began to notice things about him that had nothing to do with ranching or riding. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was amused, the careful way he handled frightened animals, his voice low and soothing, the strength in his hands, weathered from hard work, but always gentle when he helped her down from the horse or handed her a tool. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as though her thoughts and opinions mattered. Mrs. Henderson noticed the amount of time Emmeline spent with Quinn and made occasional teasing comments, but they were good-natured. "That Quad boy is smitten," she said one evening as Emmeline returned from another day at the property. "And I do not blame him. You have been good for each other." "We are just friends," Emmeline protested, though her cheeks burned. "He is helping me learn about the ranch. Mrs. Henderson said, clearly unconvinced. "If you say so, dear." But Emmeline could not deny, at least to herself, that her feelings for Quinn had begun to shift into something more complicated than simple gratitude. She found herself thinking about him when they were apart, looking forward to each morning when he would arrive with the horses. She noticed the way other women in town looked at him, and she felt a possessive flutter in her chest that she had no right to feel. June turned to July, and the heat intensified. Emmeline had grown accustomed to it now, no longer wearing the restrictive Eastern fashions that had nearly killed her on her first day. She wore simple cotton dresses and sturdy boots, and her fair skin had developed a light tan despite her best efforts to stay covered. Her hands, once soft and useless, had developed calluses from work. Quinn noticed the changes. "You are not the same woman who stumbled off that stage," he said one afternoon as they rested in the shade of an oak tree, sharing water from a canteen. "You are tougher now, stronger." "I feel different," Emmeline admitted. "I never knew I could do things like this. Back in Boston, I was taught that ladies should be decorative and helpless, that work was beneath us. But out here, work means survival. It means building something real. Does that mean you have decided to stay?" She looked out at the land that had become increasingly familiar to her, the rolling grassland and the creek sparkling in the sunlight. "Yes," she said, surprised by how certain she felt. "I am going to stay. I am going to make this ranch work." Quinn's smile was slow and genuine, and it made something warm bloom in her chest. "Then we need to talk about those cattle. The longer they run wild, the harder it will be to bring them in. We should organize a roundup." "A roundup? I do not even know what that means." "It means gathering the scattered cattle and bringing them back to your property where they can be properly managed. I can bring some men from the double bar to help, but you should be there too. You should learn how it is done." The roundup happened a week later, and it was unlike anything Emmeline had ever experienced. Quinn arrived before dawn with 3 other ranch hands, all of them mounted on strong, agile horses. He had brought Clementine for Emmeline, and to her surprise, he also brought a second horse, a spirited chestnut mare named Rosie. "Clementine is a wonderful teacher," Quinn said, "but Rosie here is a cow pony. She knows the work and can help you learn. When you are ready, we will switch you over." The idea terrified and thrilled Emmeline in equal measure. But she trusted Quinn, trusted that he would not put her in a situation she could not handle. They rode out as the sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, and Quinn explained the plan. "We will spread out and move through the areas where the cattle tend to graze. When we spot them, we will gradually push them toward your property. The key is patience. Move too fast and you will scatter them. Move too slow and they will wander off. You need to find the right pressure." It was harder than it sounded. The cattle were half wild after months without proper management, and they were skittish and unpredictable. Emmeline watched the experienced ranch hands work, saw how they anticipated the animals' movements, and used their horses to guide the herd. Quinn stayed close to her, coaching her through each step. "See how that cow is looking to break left. Move Clementine over there, block her path. That is it, nice and easy. You are doing great." The work was exhausting and exhilarating. Emmeline felt her confidence grow with each successful maneuver, each cow that moved in the direction she intended. By midday, they had gathered most of the herd, about 18 head in total, and were guiding them toward the Thornton property. That was when one of the younger steers panicked and bolted. It happened so fast that Emmeline barely had time to register it. The steer broke from the herd and ran flat out across the grassland, and without thinking, she urged Clementine into pursuit. The mare responded instantly, her steady walk transforming into a ground-eating gallop. Wind whipped past Emmeline's face, and her heart pounded with a mixture of terror and pure joy. She had never moved so fast in her life, had never felt so utterly alive. Clementine seemed to know exactly what to do, angling to cut off the steer's escape route, and Emmeline just held on and tried to stay balanced. Quinn appeared beside her on Copper, his face tense with concentration. Together, they managed to turn the steer back toward the herd, and once it was safely rejoined with the others, Quinn pulled up alongside her. "That was reckless," he said, but there was no real anger in his voice. "You could have been thrown." "But I was not," Emmeline said, breathless and grinning. "Did you see? I actually did it. I kept up." Quinn stared at her for a long moment, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. Yes, he said quietly. You did. They got the cattle back to Emmeline's property without further incident, and the ranch hands helped get them settled in the repaired corrals. As the men prepared to head back to the double bar, Quinn lingered. You did good work today, he said. Natural talent, maybe. Or a good teacher, Emmeline replied, feeling bold. They stood in the gathering twilight, the air finally cooling after the heat of the day. Emmeline knew she should thank him and let him go home, knew that standing here in the near darkness alone with him was probably improper by any standard she had been raised with. But she could not bring herself to move, to break whatever this moment was between them. Emmeline, Quinn started, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words. I should tell you something. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What is it? When I first saw you step off that stage, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. City soft and completely out of place, but beautiful. I figured you would take one look at this town and get right back on the next stage east. He took off his hat, turning it in his hands. I am glad you did not. So am I, she whispered. These past weeks, getting to know you, watching you tackle this new life with such determination, I have come to care for you. More than I probably should, given the difference in our situations. You own property and I am just a ranch hand, but I cannot help how I feel and I needed you to know. Emmeline felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. Quinn, I do not care about our different situations. I care about the fact that you have been kinder to me than anyone in my life. You have believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You have made me feel capable and strong and valued. I care about you too, very much. He stepped closer, and she could see the hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. I do not want to take advantage of your situation. You are new here, still finding your way, and I do not want you to feel obligated because I have been helping you. You are not taking advantage of anything, Emmeline said firmly. I know my own mind, Quinn Quade, probably better now than I ever did in Boston. What I feel for you has nothing to do with obligation, and everything to do with the fact that you are a good, honest, hard-working man who makes me laugh, and makes me want to be better than I am. That finally seemed to break through his reservations. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. Then I would very much like to court you properly, Miss Thornton, if you will have me. I would like that very much, Mr. Quade. They stood there holding hands as the stars began to appear overhead. And Emmeline thought about how far she had come from that first terrible day when she had nearly collapsed in the street. She had found strength she never knew she possessed, and she had found something else too, something precious and unexpected. She had found love. The courtship proceeded with a careful propriety that amused Emmeline given the amount of time they already spent together. But Quinn was determined to do things right, to show respect for her reputation, and to make his intentions clear to the whole town. He called on her formally at the boarding house, bringing her small gifts. Wildflowers picked from the range, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a pair of riding gloves that fit her perfectly. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting side by side in the worn wooden pews while Reverend Walsh preached about community and faith. Afterward, Quinn would walk her back to the boarding house, and they would talk about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from ranch business to childhood memories to dreams for the future. Mrs. Henderson approved wholeheartedly. I told you that boy was smitten, she said with satisfaction. And you are good for each other. He needs someone with your spirit, and you need someone with his steadiness. But not everyone in town was pleased. Emmeline learned this when she went to the general store one afternoon and overheard two women talking in hushed voices. It is unseemly, one of them said. She has only been here a few months and already has her hooks in one of the best men in the county." "I heard she threw herself at him," the other replied. "Pretended she could not ride so he would have to spend time with her." Emmeline's face burned, but she held her head high and completed her purchases without acknowledging that she had heard. Quinn was waiting outside with the horses, and he immediately noticed her distress. "What happened?" She told him about the women's comments, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I know I should not care what they think, but it hurts to be spoken about that way. I never threw myself at you." "Of course you did not." Quinn's jaw was tight with anger. "People talk because they have nothing better to do with their time. They will find someone else to gossip about soon enough. Does it bother you, the talk?" He took her hands in his, right there on the street where anyone could see. "The only thing that bothers me is seeing you upset. I know the truth, you know the truth, and that is all that matters. Let them talk." His certainty soothed her wounded pride, and she managed a smile. "You are right. I will not let it bother me." But the incident reminded her that she was still an outsider in many ways, still the Eastern woman who did not quite fit into the established social order of Madisonville. She would have to earn her place here through hard work and time, just as she had earned her place on the ranch. July gave way to August, and Emmeline threw herself into making the ranch productive. With Quinn's guidance and occasional help from the double bar hands, she learned how to manage her small herd, how to check fences regularly, how to ensure her cattle had adequate water and grazing. It was relentless work, especially in the August heat, but she found satisfaction in each completed task. Quinn had gradually transitioned her from Clementine to Rosie, the cow pony, and the difference was remarkable. Rosie was responsive and quick, bred for ranch work, and riding her felt like partnering with an athlete. Emmeline had grown confident enough in her riding that she could keep up with Quinn on their daily rounds of her property, could even manage some of the more complex maneuvers required for working cattle. One morning in late August, Quinn arrived with a challenge in his eyes. "I think you are ready to try something new," he said. "What kind of something?" "A real race. Just you and me, from here to that big oak tree by the creek and back. I want to see what you can do when you really let Rosie run." Emmeline felt a flutter of nerves mixed with excitement. "You will beat me easily." "Maybe, but that is not the point. The point is seeing how far you have come," he grinned at her, "unless you are scared." "I am not scared," she said, rising to the bait exactly as he had intended. "You are on." They lined up their horses side by side, and Quinn counted down. 3, 2, 1, go. Emmeline leaned forward and gave Rosie her head, and the mare exploded into a gallop. The world became a blur of speed and wind, and Emmeline felt laughter bubble up from her chest. This was nothing like that first terrified chase after the runaway steer. This was controlled, purposeful, exhilarating. She knew what she was doing now, knew how to move with the horse instead of against her, knew how to balance and guide and trust. Quinn was ahead of her, Copper's longer legs giving him an advantage, but she kept pace better than she had expected. They reached the oak tree, wheeled around, and headed back. Emmeline urged Rosie faster, and the mare responded with a burst of speed that narrowed the gap between them. They crossed the finish line with Quinn barely a length ahead, both of them laughing and breathless. Quinn pulled Copper to a stop and looked at her with undisguised admiration. 3 months ago you could barely sit a horse, he said. Now look at you, racing like you were born to it. Emmeline felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with winning or losing and everything to do with how far she had come. I had a good teacher, she said, echoing her words from weeks ago. You had determination and courage, Quinn corrected. I just pointed you in the right direction. They walked the horses to cool them down. and as they strolled side by side through the tall grass, Quinn reached over and took her hand. They had become more physically comfortable with each other as the weeks passed, small touches and hand-holding that spoke of growing intimacy, but always within the bounds of propriety. "Emmeline," he said, his voice serious, "I have been thinking about the future, about us." Her heart began to race for an entirely different reason than the ride. "What about us?" "I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing I will see you, work beside you, build something together. I know it has only been a few months, and maybe it is too soon, but I have never been more certain of anything." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I am not a wealthy man. I have some savings, but nothing compared to what you could probably find if you looked for a husband with means. All I can offer you is hard work, loyalty, and a love that is not going to fade." Emmeline felt tears spill down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Quinn, I do not want wealth or means. I want exactly what you just described. I want to build a life with you. I want to work beside you and laugh with you and face whatever challenges come our way together. Yes, it has only been a few months, but these have been the most important months of my life. You have helped me become the person I was always meant to be. Is that a yes?" He asked, his voice rough with emotion. "That is a yes," she confirmed. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes to all of it." He pulled her into his arms then, and she went willingly, feeling the solid strength of him against her. When he kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, a promise of all the days to come. They announced their engagement the following Sunday at church, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Even the women who had gossiped about Emmeline seemed caught up in the romance of it all, offering congratulations and advice about wedding planning. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears and insisted on hosting an engagement party at the boarding house. Quinn's parents, who lived on a small homestead near the double bar, welcomed Emmeline with open arms. His mother, Mare, was a warm woman with Quinn's same dark eyes, and his father, Joseph, was a quiet man whose occasional dry comments made Emmeline laugh. They had built their life together through hard work and perseverance, and they understood exactly what their son and his intended were taking on. "This country is not easy on anyone," Mare said as she and Emmeline sat together shelling peas for supper. "But it is especially hard on marriages if the partners are not equally committed to the work. I can see that you and Quinn have something special. You both pull your weight and you respect each other. That is what matters." "I never imagined myself as a rancher's wife," Emmeline admitted. "But now I cannot imagine being anything else," Mare smiled. "That is how you know it is right." They decided on a September wedding, wanting to marry before the busy season of preparing for winter set in. It would be a simple ceremony at the church, followed by a celebration at the Thornton Ranch, which would soon become the Quad Ranch once they were wed. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Emmeline and Quinn worked together to prepare the ranch house for their married life. They repainted the interior, repaired the roof on the barn, and built additional corrals for the growing herd. Quinn officially gave his notice at the double bar, though his boss, Mr. Garrett, was understanding and even offered to help them get established. "You have been a good hand," Garrett said, shaking Quinn's hand, "and your wife has proven herself capable. I expect you two will build something fine together. If you ever need help, you know where to find me." The night before the wedding, Emmeline stood on the porch of what would soon be her marital home, looking out at the land she had come to love. The September air was finally cooling after the brutal summer heat, and the stars overhead seemed impossibly bright. She thought about the frightened, uncertain woman who had stepped off the stage just a few months ago, and she marveled at the transformation. She had come to Texas, running from a life that had become unbearable, with no real plan beyond claiming an inheritance. She had found so much more than property. She had found purpose, strength, independence, and love. Most importantly, she had found herself. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the sky a brilliant blue with only a few wispy clouds drifting overhead. Emmeline dressed in a simple but elegant dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, cream-colored with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She wore her hair loosely curled, with small wildflowers woven through it, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a woman who looked happy and healthy and whole. Quinn waited for her at the church, looking handsome in a new suit that he wore with endearing awkwardness, clearly more comfortable in his work clothes. But when he saw her walking down the aisle, his face lit up with such joy and love that Emmeline felt her breath catch. Reverend Walsh performed the ceremony with simple dignity, speaking about partnership and commitment and the blessing of finding a true companion in life. When it came time for the vows, Quinn took her hands and spoke clearly, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through everything life brings. I promise to work hard to build the life we both want, to listen when you speak, and to value your thoughts and dreams as much as my own. I promise to be the man you deserve, every single day." Emmeline's own vows came from her heart. "I promise to be your partner in every sense of the word, to share the burdens and the joys equally. I promise to trust you, support you, and love you with everything I have. I promise to build this life with you, not behind you or ahead of you, but beside you, always beside you." When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed her with a tenderness that made the small congregation sigh collectively. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand, officially Mr. and Mrs. Quade, and stepped out into the bright September sunshine to find the whole town waiting to congratulate them. The celebration at the ranch lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing. Quinn's father played fiddle while couples danced in the yard, and Emmeline found herself passed from partner to partner, as the men of Madisonville took turns spinning her around. But she always ended up back with Quinn, and finally, as the sun began to set and the guests started to drift away, they were left alone. They stood together on the porch of their home, Quinn's arm around her waist, and watched the last of the guests disappear down the road toward town. The ranch was quiet except for the usual sounds of evening, cattle lowing softly in the distance, crickets beginning their nightly chorus, the windmill creaking gently as it turned. "Tired?" Quinn asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Exhausted," Emmeline admitted, "but happy, so incredibly happy." "Me too." He turned her in his arms so she was facing him. "I love you, Mrs. Quade." "I love you too," she whispered, and then words seemed insufficient for what she felt. She showed him instead, kissing him with all the passion and promise she had kept carefully restrained during their courtship. Quinn responded in kind, and they made their way inside, to the bedroom they would share, to the beginning of their married life together. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and merge their lives completely. But it was an adjustment they both embraced. Emmeline discovered that Quinn snored softly when he slept on his back, that he preferred his coffee strong enough to strip paint, and that he sang quietly to the horses while he worked, old songs his mother had taught him. Quinn learned that Emmeline talked in her sleep sometimes, that she had a passion for reading that rivaled his own, and that she had a stubborn streak a mile wide when it came to ranch work, refusing to let him shoulder all the difficult tasks alone. They worked together seamlessly, developing a rhythm that made the endless chores of ranch life manageable. Quinn would wake before dawn and handle the morning feeding while Emmeline prepared breakfast. They would eat together, planning the day's work, then divide tasks based on what needed doing. Some days they worked side by side, mending fences or moving cattle. Other days they split up, Quinn handling the heavier work while Emmeline managed the chickens, the garden she had planted, and the endless tasks of maintaining the house. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, Quinn often working on tack repair or whittling while Emmeline sewed or read aloud from whatever book they were currently sharing. They talked about everything, their conversations ranging from practical matters of the ranch to deeper discussions about their hopes and fears, their pasts and their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the herd," Quinn said one evening in late October. "We have done well with the cattle we have, and the grazing can support more. If we can build up to 50 head or so, we could make a real living from this place." "How would we afford more cattle?" Emmeline asked practically. They had been careful with money, but there was not much left over after covering basic expenses. "We could take a loan against the property, or we could try to buy a few at a time when we have the cash. It would be slower, but safer." He looked at her seriously. "I would not want to risk the ranch. This is our home, and I will not gamble with that." "Then we do it slowly," Emmeline decided. "I would rather build carefully than risk losing everything we have worked for." It was one of the things Quinn loved most about her, this practical wisdom that balanced his own occasional impulse to move faster. They were good partners, checking and balancing each other, making decisions together rather than one of them dominating. Winter came to Texas, not with snow but with cold rains and bitter winds that swept across the open range. The work did not stop but became harder, colder, more miserable. There were mornings when Emmeline did not want to leave the warm cocoon of their bed, did not want to face the mud and the chill and the endless demands of the animals that depended on them. But she always got up, always pulled on her boots and her coat and went out to do what needed doing. Because this was the life she had chosen, and she had meant every word of her wedding vows. She and Quinn were partners, and that meant sharing the hard times as well as the good. One particularly brutal morning in January, they were out checking the herd when they found a cow in distress, struggling to birth a calf. Quinn immediately swung down from copper and approached carefully, assessing the situation. "The calf is breech," he said grimly. "We need to help her, or we will lose them both." Emmeline had seen births before in the months they had been working the ranch, but never one this difficult. She dismounted and came to Quinn's side, ready to help however she could. For the next hour, they worked together in the cold mud, Quinn's hands and arms disappearing inside the cow as he tried to reposition the calf, Emmeline holding the nervous mother's head and speaking soothingly to keep her calm. It was exhausting, frightening work, and there were moments when Emmeline was certain they would fail. But Quinn never gave up, his face set with determination, and finally, he managed to turn the calf. The birth happened quickly after that, the small body sliding out into the world wet and steaming in the cold air. For a terrible moment, the calf did not move, and Emmeline felt her heart sink. But then Quinn cleared its nose and mouth, rubbed it vigorously with his coat, and the little creature drew a shuddering breath and bleated. The mother cow, exhausted but recovered, immediately began licking her baby, and within minutes, the calf was struggling to stand on wobbly legs. Quinn sat back in the mud, his face and clothes filthy, and looked at Emmeline with a tired smile. "We did it. You did it," she corrected, but he shook his head. "We did it together. I could not have managed without you keeping the mother calm. This is what it means to be partners, Emmeline. Facing the hard things together and coming through on the other side." She kissed him right there in the mud, not caring about the cold or the filth or anything, except the fact that they had just saved 2 lives, and proved once again that together they could handle whatever this life threw at them. Spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. The cattle they had saved in January thrived, along with several other calves born to the herd. The garden Emmeline had planted began to flourish, providing fresh vegetables that were a welcome change from their winter diet of preserved foods. The weather warmed, the rains became gentler, and the whole world seemed to bloom. It was in April that Emmeline first suspected she might be pregnant. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes until she was certain, but as the signs became unmistakable, she knew she needed to tell Quinn. She chose a quiet evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, the day's work complete, and the ranch peaceful around them. "Quinn," she said, taking his hand, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her, immediately alert to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am better than all right. I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, he just stared at her, and she watched the news sink in. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he pulled her into his arms with a whoop of joy that startled the chickens from their roost. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. This is everything. You are everything." He pulled back to look at her face, his hands framing her cheeks. "How are you feeling? Do you need to rest more? We need to make sure you are not overdoing it." "I am pregnant, not fragile," Emmeline said, amused by his sudden concern. "The doctor said I am perfectly healthy, and there is no reason I cannot continue my normal activities for now. I will slow down when I need to, I promise." But Quinn was already mentally rearranging their work schedule, insisting on taking over the heavier chores, worrying about her health in a way that was both touching and occasionally irritating. Emmeline bore his fussing with patience, knowing it came from love, and the fact that this baby represented the future they were building together. The news spread through Madisonville quickly, as all news did in a small town, and Emmeline found herself the recipient of advice from every woman who had ever borne a child. Some of it was helpful, some of it contradictory, and some of it completely bizarre, but she accepted it all graciously, knowing it came from genuine care and community. Quinn Quade was particularly excited about becoming a grandmother, and she spent hours with Emmeline, sharing her own experiences and helping prepare for the baby's arrival. Together they sewed tiny clothes, prepared the small room off the main bedroom that would serve as a nursery, and gathered all the supplies a new baby would need. "Are you scared?" Marie asked one afternoon as they worked on a quilt for the baby's cradle. "Terrified," Emmeline admitted. "I know nothing about babies or being a mother. What if I do it wrong?" "You will do it wrong sometimes," Marie said matter-of-factly. "Every mother does. But you will also do it right a lot more often, and you will learn as you go. The fact that you care enough to be scared is a good sign. It means you take it seriously." As summer approached, Emmeline grew rounder and the work became more challenging. She could no longer ride Rosie, which frustrated her enormously, but Quinn brought Clementine back and she could still manage gentle rides on the patient mare. She moved more slowly, tired more easily, but she refused to stop contributing to the ranch work. "I am not an invalid," she insisted when Quinn tried to forbid her from helping repair a section of fence. "I know my limits, and I will ask for help when I need it. But I am not going to sit in the house doing nothing while there is work to be done." Quinn knew better than to argue when she got that stubborn set to her jaw, so he watched her carefully, ready to intervene if she overdid it, but allowing her the independence and agency she needed. It was a delicate balance, but they had learned to navigate such things together. The baby came in late September, almost exactly a year after their wedding. Emmeline's labor began in the early morning hours, and Quinn immediately rode to town to fetch the doctor and Marie. The next 12 hours were the longest of Quinn's life, pacing outside the bedroom while the women worked inside, occasionally hearing Emmeline cry out and feeling completely helpless. But when the baby's first wail finally pierced the air, Quinn felt his knees go weak with relief. Marie emerged a few minutes later, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, beautiful boy, and Emmeline is fine, tired but fine. You can go in now." Quinn entered the bedroom to find Emmeline propped up against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face and the most beautiful smile he had ever seen. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Quinn approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at the small face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small snuffling sounds as he tried to find his fist to suck on. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, and Quinn felt his heart expand with a love so overwhelming it was almost painful. "What should we name him?" Emmeline asked, watching Quinn's face. They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but nothing had felt exactly right. Now, looking at his son, Quinn knew. "Joseph," he said, "after my father, Joseph Quade." Emmeline smiled. "Joseph, I love it. Hello, little Joseph. Welcome to the world." Quinn sat carefully on the edge of the bed and put his arm around his wife, marveling at the small miracle they had created together. This baby represented everything they had built, the love and partnership and hard work that had transformed both of their lives. He was the future they had dreamed of, made real and tangible and absolutely perfect. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Joseph was a good baby, generally content unless he was hungry or needed changing, and he seemed to thrive under the devoted attention of his parents and grandparents. Emmeline adapted to motherhood with the same determination she had brought to ranching, learning quickly and trusting her instincts when advice failed her. Quinn was a devoted father, rising for nighttime feedings despite having to work the next day, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at every tiny change. Watching him with Joseph made Emmeline fall in love with him all over again, seeing this tender side of him that the baby brought out. As Joseph grew, the ranch grew with him. True to their plan, Quinn and Emmeline had slowly built up the herd, buying a few head at a time when they could afford it. And by the time Joseph turned 1, they had nearly 60 cattle bearing the Quad brand. It was hard work managing a larger herd with a small child, but they made it work through careful planning and the help of their community. They hired a young man named Peter Lawson to help with the ranch work, giving Quinn the freedom to focus on the more complex aspects of running the operation while still having time for his family. Peter was 17, the son of a widow in town who was struggling to feed her children, and he worked hard to prove himself worthy of the job. Emmeline taught him to ride better, just as Quinn had taught her, and Quinn showed him the ins and outs of cattle management. "You are good with him," Emmeline observed one evening after Peter had gone home. "Patient and clear in your explanations, like you were with me." "He reminds me of myself at that age," Quinn said, "eager to learn but not sure how to go about it." Everyone deserves someone to believe in them and give them a chance. It was one of the many things Emmeline loved about her husband, his willingness to help others, to share what he knew without expecting anything in return except honest effort. He treated Peter with respect, paid him fairly, and gave him opportunities to grow and learn. In return, Peter was fiercely loyal, working long hours and taking pride in the ranch's success. Joseph took his first steps in the spring of 1875, tottering across the kitchen floor to Quinn's outstretched arms while Emmeline watched with tears in her eyes. He was a bright, curious child, already showing signs of his father's calm temperament and his mother's stubborn determination. He loved the animals, especially the horses, and would squeal with delight when Quinn lifted him onto Copper's back for a gentle ride around the yard. "He is going to be a natural horseman," Quinn said proudly. "Look at how he sits, already balanced and comfortable." "He is barely more than a baby," Emmeline protested, though she could not help but smile at Joseph's obvious joy. "There is plenty of time for him to learn to ride." But Quinn was right. As Joseph grew, his affinity for horses became increasingly obvious. By the time he was 3, he could sit on Clementine by himself, guiding her around the corral with confidence that amazed everyone who saw it. By 5, he was helping with simple chores, feeding the chickens and gathering eggs under Emmeline's supervision. In the summer of 1877, Emmeline discovered she was pregnant again. The news was exciting but also slightly terrifying, as she remembered how all-consuming Joseph's infancy had been. But they were more established now, the ranch running smoothly, and she felt more confident in her ability to manage both motherhood and ranch work. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and when their daughter was born in early spring of 1878, it was a faster, less frightening process. They named her Margaret, after Emmeline's mother who had died when Emmeline was young, and called her Maggie from the start. Maggie was different from Joseph in almost every way. Where he had been calm and quiet, she was energetic and loud, demanding attention and expressing her opinions from her very first day. She had Quinn's dark eyes but Emmeline's fair coloring, and she was absolutely fearless, keeping her parents in a constant state of vigilance as she attempted increasingly dangerous feats as soon as she could crawl. "She is going to give us gray hair," Quinn said one afternoon after rescuing 2-year-old Maggie from attempting to climb into the chicken coop. "I have never seen a child so determined to find trouble." "She gets that from you," Emmeline said, amused. "From me? I am the responsible one. You are also the one who climbed onto the barn roof last month because you thought you saw a loose shingle, despite the fact that we could have hired someone to do it safely." Quinn conceded the point with a rueful grin. "All right, maybe she gets it from both of us." Joseph was a devoted big brother, watching over Maggie with a seriousness that was both endearing and sometimes amusing in a 5-year-old. He would bring her toys when she cried, help Emmeline change her diapers, and tell her long, rambling stories about the horses and cattle that she was far too young to understand, but seemed to enjoy nonetheless. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch continued to prosper, their herd growing to over 100 head, making them one of the more successful operations in the area. They built additional corrals, expanded the barn, and added a room onto the house to give the children more space as they grew. Peter Lawson eventually left to start his own small ranch with the money he had saved working for the Quads, and they hired 2 new hands to replace him, good men who became part of the extended ranch family. Emmeline had become a respected member of the Madisonville community, her early status as an outsider long forgotten. She served on the church committee, helped organize the annual Harvest Festival, and was known for her generosity in helping neighbors in need. The ranch house was frequently full of visitors, friends stopping by for coffee and conversation, and Emmeline loved the sense of belonging she had found. Quinn, meanwhile, had developed a reputation as one of the most knowledgeable cattlemen in the area. Other ranchers sought his advice on breeding and range management, and he was always willing to share what he had learned. He served on the local cattlemen's association and helped mediate disputes between ranchers over water rights and boundary issues. Together, they had built something remarkable. Not just a successful ranch, but a life full of love, purpose, and community. They had grown together, learned together, and created a family and a legacy that would endure. On their 10th wedding anniversary in September of 1884, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for a decade. Joseph, now 11, was in the barn tending to the horses. Maggie, 6 years old and still fearless, was supposedly in her room but was probably getting into some kind of mischief. The sounds of the ranch surrounded them, familiar and comforting. "You ever think about that first day?" Quinn asked, his arm around Emmeline's waist. "When you stepped off that stage looking like you were about to faint." "I think about it often," Emmeline said. "I was so scared, so completely out of my depth. I thought I had made a terrible mistake coming here. I am glad you stayed." "So am I." She leaned into him, feeling the solid strength that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. "You changed my life, Quinn. You took a frightened city woman and helped her become someone strong and capable. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything." "You gave me just as much," Quinn said. "You took a ranch hand with limited prospects and helped him build something real. You believed in me, challenged me, made me want to be better. You are my partner in every sense of the word, and I love you more now than I did the day we married. Only more." Emmeline teased, "Infinitely more, exponentially more, more than all the stars in that sky." She turned in his arms and kissed him, this man who had been her teacher, her partner, her lover, and her best friend for 10 incredible years. The kiss was interrupted by Maggie bursting through the door, covered in what appeared to be flour, chattering about an adventure involving the pantry and a recipe she had been trying to follow. Quinn and Emmeline exchanged a look of amused exasperation and went inside to deal with whatever disaster their daughter had created. This was their life, messy and chaotic and absolutely perfect. They had built it together, one day at a time, one challenge at a time, one moment of love and laughter at a time. The years continued to unfold with the usual mixture of joy and hardship that characterized life on a Texas ranch. In 1885, a drought tested their water resources and forced them to make difficult decisions about the herd. They sold off some of their cattle to reduce strain on the grazing land, taking a financial hit, but ensuring the long-term health of the ranch. It was a hard decision, but they made it together, and the ranch survived. Joseph grew into a tall, capable young man who was every bit the horseman Quinn had predicted he would be. He had his father's calm demeanor and his mother's sharp mind, and by the time he was 15, he was managing significant portions of the ranch operation on his own. He talked about someday expanding their operation, maybe even driving cattle to market himself, and Quinn and Emmeline supported his ambitions while ensuring he understood the hard work required to achieve them. Maggie, meanwhile, showed no interest in traditional feminine pursuits, despite Emmeline's gentle attempts to teach her sewing and cooking. Instead, she followed her brother and father around the ranch, insisting on learning everything they knew. She could rope a calf by the time she was 10, could ride as well as most of the ranch hands by 12, and had a head for numbers that made her invaluable when it came to ranch finances. "She is going to be a force to be reckoned with," Mare said one day as they watched teenage Maggie argue passionately with one of the ranch hands about the best way to move a section of fence. "I pity any man who tries to tell her what she can and cannot do." She gets that from her mother, Quinn said, winking at Emmeline. In 1890, tragedy struck when Mare Quade passed away suddenly after a brief illness. The loss hit the family hard, and Quinn spent weeks moving through his grief while trying to support his father, who was devastated by the death of his wife of 40 years. Emmeline held them all together, providing strength and comfort while managing her own sorrow at losing a woman who had become like a mother to her. Joseph Quade, Sr., moved to the ranch after Mare's death, unable to bear staying in the home he had shared with his wife. He took over the small room they had added years ago, and despite his grief, he found purpose in helping with the ranch work and spending time with his grandchildren. His presence was a comfort to Quinn, and the two men grew even closer as they worked side by side. Life continued its forward march. Joseph Jr. began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Sarah who loved ranch life as much as he did. Maggie, at 16, was still declaring she would never marry because no man could possibly keep up with her, though Emmeline noticed her daughter paid particular attention to a young cowboy who had recently been hired at a nearby spread. In the spring of 1893, 20 years after Emmeline had first arrived in Madisonville, she and Quinn took a rare day away from the ranch to ride out to the spot where she had first gotten on Clementine, where he had first led her gentle mare through the dusty streets. The town had grown over the years, new buildings replacing old ones, but this spot remained largely unchanged. "I remember how terrified you were," Quinn said, helping her down from her horse. They still rode together regularly, though these days it was more for pleasure than necessity. "You held onto that saddle horn like your life depended on it." "My life did depend on it," Emmeline said. "Or at least it felt that way. I had never been so scared and so grateful at the same time. You saved me that day, Quinn, not just from heat stroke, but from a life without purpose or direction." "We saved each other," Quinn corrected. "I was just a ranch hand going through the motions of life. Then you arrived, this fierce, determined woman hiding behind fear and propriety, and suddenly everything had meaning. Teaching you to ride, watching you discover your strength, falling in love with you, it gave me purpose too." They sat together on a fallen log, hands clasped, looking out at the land they both loved. So much had changed in 20 years. The frightened Eastern woman and the patient cowboy had become a formidable partnership, building a ranch, raising children, and creating a legacy that would endure for generations. "You remember that first race we ran?" Emmeline asked. "In late summer, from the house to the oak tree." "Of course. You came so close to beating me. I remember thinking that you had come so far in such a short time, that you were going to be just fine." "I was racing you home," Emmeline said softly. "That was when I realized this place, this life with you, it had become home. Not the property, not the ranch, but being with you. That was home." Quinn pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, remembering and appreciating all they had built together. The sun was warm on their shoulders, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. It was an ordinary moment, but it was also extraordinary in its simple contentment. That evening, they returned to the ranch to find both their children waiting on the porch, looking excited about something. Joseph had Sarah with him, and both young people were practically vibrating with anticipation. "We wanted you both here when we shared our news," Joseph said, taking Sarah's hand. "Sarah and I are engaged. We want to get married in the fall and start our own family." Emmeline felt tears spring to her eyes as she hugged her son and future daughter-in-law. Quinn shook Joseph's hand with solemn pride, then pulled the young man into an embrace. "I'm so happy for you both," Emmeline said. "Sarah, welcome to the family." The wedding took place in October of 1893. a beautiful ceremony that reminded Quinn and Emmeline of their own wedding 20 years earlier. Joseph and Sarah chose to stay on the ranch, living in a small house they built on the property, and Joseph continued to work the land alongside his father and grandfather. It was everything Quinn and Emmeline had hoped for, seeing their son continue the legacy they had built. Maggie, meanwhile, had finally admitted to her interest in the young cowboy, a man named Daniel Porter who worked at a neighboring spread. To everyone's surprise except Emmeline's, Daniel was completely unfazed by Maggie's headstrong nature and matched her determination with his own quiet strength. They married in the spring of 1894, and while Maggie insisted they would run their own ranch rather than staying on the family property, they settled close enough that she could visit regularly and continue to be involved in the Quad Ranch operations. In 1895, Joseph and Sarah welcomed Quinn and Emmeline's first grandchild, a boy they named Quinn after his grandfather. Holding his tiny namesake, Quinn felt the overwhelming rush of love and pride that brought tears to his eyes. "I cannot believe we are grandparents," he said to Emmeline that night as they prepared for bed. "It seems like just yesterday we were starting out ourselves." 22 years, Emmeline said. 22 years since I stepped off that stage and into your life. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Quinn corrected with a smile. "The best decision was saying yes when I asked to court you. That was your decision, not mine. I just wisely accepted." They had this comfortable way with each other now, gentle teasing and deep affection that came from more than 2 decades of partnership. They knew each other completely, could communicate with just a look, could anticipate each other's needs and thoughts. They had weathered droughts and financial setbacks, illness and loss, the challenges of raising children and running a ranch. And through it all, their love had only deepened and strengthened. Maggie and Daniel welcomed their first child in early 1896, a daughter they named Mare after Quinn's mother. The ranch that had once been just Emmeline and Quinn now buzzed with the laughter of grandchildren, the busy activity of multiple generations working together to maintain and grow the operation. Joseph Quade, Sr., lived to see his great-grandchildren before passing peacefully in his sleep in 1897 at the age of 78. His funeral was well attended, a testament to the respect he had earned over decades of honest work and kindness to his neighbors. Quinn mourned his father, but took comfort in knowing that Joseph had lived a long, full life and had died surrounded by family who loved him. As the century drew to a close, Quinn and Emmeline found themselves in the unusual position of being able to step back slightly from the daily operations of the ranch. Joseph handled most of the work now, with help from the ranch hands and occasional assistance from Daniel when his own spread allowed. This gave Quinn and Emmeline the freedom to enjoy each other's company more, to take rides just for pleasure, to spend time with their grandchildren, to simply appreciate the life they had built. On their 25th wedding anniversary in September of 1899, the family threw a large celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors from all over the county attended, and there were speeches and toasts honoring Quinn and Emmeline's partnership and the example they had set for their community. 25 years ago, I was just a cowboy who saw a woman in trouble and stopped to help, Quinn said when called upon to speak. I had no idea that simple act of kindness would lead to the greatest adventure of my life. Emmeline, you have been my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life for a quarter century. You have made me a better man, a better father, and hopefully a decent grandfather. Here is to 25 more years together. The crowd cheered and applauded, but Emmeline only had eyes for Quinn. She stood and took his hand, addressing the gathering with confidence that would have been impossible for the frightened young woman who had arrived in Madisonville so many years ago. When I came to Texas, I was running from a life that had become unbearable. I expected to sell this property and move on to somewhere easier, somewhere more familiar. But Quinn showed me that easy is not always better, that challenge and hard work can forge something stronger and more valuable than comfort ever could. He taught me to ride, to ranch, to believe in myself. He gave me a home, a family, and a love that has sustained me through everything. I am the woman I am today because of the faith he had in me, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for the day he put me on a gentle mare and walked beside me. There was not a dry eye in the crowd, and Quinn pulled her into his arms right there in front of everyone, kissing her to enthusiastic cheers and applause. The new century arrived with hope and celebration. The ranch was prosperous. The family was healthy and happy, and Quinn and Emmeline looked forward to whatever the future would bring. They were in their early 50s now, still active and involved in the ranch work, but also content to pass more responsibility to the younger generation. Joseph and Sarah had 3 children by 1902, with another on the way. Maggie and Daniel had 2 daughters who were every bit as fearless as their mother. The ranch house was constantly full of grandchildren, noise, and laughter. It was everything Quinn and Emmeline had dreamed of during those early days when they were just starting out. In the spring of 1903, 30 years after Emmeline's arrival in Madisonville, she and Quinn took another of their reminiscent rides out to significant places from their shared history. They visited the spot where she had first mounted Clementine, the oak tree where they had raced all those years ago, the place by the creek where Quinn had first told her he wanted to court her. 30 years, Emmeline marveled. It has gone so fast and so slow at the same time. Some days it feels like just yesterday we were newly married and figuring everything out. Other days it feels like I have known you my whole life. I know what you mean, Quinn said. Sometimes I try to remember what my life was like before you, and I cannot quite picture it. You have been part of me for so long that it feels like you have always been there. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, hand in hand as their horses walked side by side. As they crested the final rise before home, Emmeline pulled her mare to a stop and looked down at the collection of buildings, corrals, and fields that made up the Quad Ranch. The original small house had been expanded several times over the years. The barn was large and sturdy, painted red with white trim. Cattle dotted the pastures, healthy and well-fed. Horses grazed in the near corral. Smoke rose from the chimney, probably Sarah preparing supper. She could see one of the grandchildren, little Quinn probably, chasing chickens around the yard while another child laughed from the porch. "Look at what we built," she said softly. "When I first saw this place, it was run down and neglected. Now it is thriving, full of life and family. We did this, Quinn. Together." "Together," he agreed, following her gaze. "Always together." They urged their horses forward and rode home, to the family waiting for them, to the life they had created through love, hard work, and unwavering partnership. As they dismounted in front of the barn, their grandchildren came running to greet them, and Quinn helped Emmeline down, his hands at her waist just as they had been that very first day. She smiled at him, this man who had been her teacher, her partner, her great love for 30 years. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For everything. For putting me on that gentle mare, for walking beside me, for teaching me to race, for loving me." "Thank you for staying," Quinn replied, kissing her softly. "For taking a chance on this life, on me, on all of it. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Emmeline Quade." They walked into the house hand in hand, surrounded by the laughter of their grandchildren and the warmth of family. The sun was setting over the Texas landscape, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and everything was exactly as it should be. The years that followed were gentle ones, marked by the quiet contentment of a life well lived. Quinn and Emmeline continued to work on the ranch, but at a pace that suited their age. They spent mornings tending the garden, afternoons riding the fence lines more for pleasure than necessity, and evenings on the porch watching their grandchildren play. In 1905, Joseph took over full operation of the ranch, though he consulted his parents on all major decisions. The transfer of responsibility was smooth and natural, a testament to how well Joseph had been prepared for the role. Quinn was proud of his son, of the capable man he had become, and grateful that the ranch would be in good hands for another generation. Maggie and Daniel's ranch also flourished, and Maggie had become known throughout the county as a shrewd businesswoman who could negotiate cattle prices with the best of them. She often brought her daughters to visit, and Emmeline loved watching her granddaughters grow up with the same fierce independence their mother possessed. In the summer of 1908, Clementine, the gentle mare who had first carried Emmeline into her new life, passed away peacefully at the remarkable age of 32. Quinn found Emmeline in the barn that evening, sitting beside the old horse, tears streaming down her face. "I know it is foolish to cry over a horse," she said as Quinn sat beside her, "but she was special. She was patient with me when I knew nothing, gentle when I was afraid. In a way, she carried me into the life I was meant to have." "It is not foolish," Quinn said, his own eyes damp. "Clementine was special. She deserves to be mourned." They sat with the old mare until the end, honoring the animal who had played such an important role in their story. They buried Clementine on a gentle slope overlooking the ranch, and Quinn carved a simple marker: "Clementine, a gentle friend who changed a life." Every time Emmeline passed that spot, she said a quiet thank you to the mare who had helped make everything possible. As Quinn and Emmeline moved into their 60s, they began to slow down in earnest. Quinn's joints ached more in the mornings, and Emmeline tired more easily than she once had. But they were healthy overall, and they remained active, just at a gentler pace. They took joy in their grandchildren, now numbering 8, and watched with pride as the older ones began to show interest in continuing the family ranching tradition. In 1910, young Quinn, Joseph's eldest son and now a young man of 15, asked his grandfather to teach him everything he knew about horses and cattle. Quinn Sr. agreed enthusiastically, and the two spent countless hours together, the older man passing down decades of knowledge and experience to his eager grandson. Watching them work together made Emmeline's heart swell with happiness. This was legacy in its truest form, knowledge and love passed from generation to generation. The family gathered in September of 1914 to celebrate Quinn and Emmeline's 40th wedding anniversary. It was a smaller, more intimate gathering than their 25th, but no less meaningful. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, and Joseph gave a toast that left Emmeline weeping happy tears. "My parents taught me what true partnership looks like," Joseph said. "They showed me that marriage is not just about love, though they have plenty of that. It is about respect, trust, and working together toward common goals. They built this ranch from almost nothing, raised a family, and created a legacy that will endure for generations. Everything I am, everything my sister and I have accomplished, we owe to their example." To Quinn and Emmeline Quade, the finest people I have ever known. That night, lying in bed with Quinn's arms around her, Emmeline reflected on 40 years of marriage. There had been hard times, certainly. The drought in the 80s, the loss of Quinn's parents, the normal struggles of raising children and running a ranch. But through it all, they had faced every challenge together, had supported and encouraged each other, had never stopped being partners in the fullest sense of the word. 40 years, she whispered. Can you believe it? Best 40 years of my life, Quinn murmured sleepily. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the part where you had to teach a terrified city woman to ride, especially that part, that was where everything started. Emmeline smiled in the darkness and snuggled closer to her husband. Outside, the Texas night was quiet except for the usual sounds of the ranch. Cattle shifting in the pasture, horses moving in the barn, the windmill creaking softly as it turned. These were the sounds of home, of the life they had built together, and Emmeline had never been more grateful for anything in her life. As they drifted off to sleep, she thought about that scared young woman who had stepped off the stage in Madisonville 41 years ago. She thought about the patient cowboy who had seen someone in need and stopped to help. She thought about a gentle mare named Clementine, and a summer of learning to ride, of racing toward home and toward a future neither of them could have imagined. She thought about all the moments that had brought them to this place. The proposal by the creek, the simple wedding, the first difficult months of marriage, the joy of children and grandchildren, the decades of working side by side to build something lasting and true. Every moment had been worth it. Every challenge overcome together had made them stronger. Quinn's breathing had deepened into sleep, and Emmeline kissed his cheek gently. "Thank you for putting me on that mare," she whispered. "Thank you for walking beside me. Thank you for teaching me to race. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for everything." The future stretched out before them, however many years they had left together. They would face those years the same way they had faced the last 41, hand in hand, heart to heart, partners in every sense of the word. And when their time came to leave this world, they would leave behind a legacy of love, hard work, and family that would endure for generations to come. In the morning, they would wake with the sun as they always had. They would share breakfast and coffee, discuss the day's work with Joseph, play with their grandchildren, and ride out to check the fence lines more from habit than necessity. They would live another ordinary, extraordinary day in the life they had built together. And that, Emmeline thought as sleep finally claimed her, was the greatest gift of all. Not wealth or fame or grand adventures, but a life filled with love, purpose, and partnership. A life where a frightened city woman could become a confident rancher. A life where a patient cowboy could build a legacy that would outlast him. A life where two people who should never have met could find each other and create something beautiful together. From that first moment, when Quinn put her on a gentle mare and walked beside her, through the summer when she learned to race him home, through 41 years of marriage and partnership, through children and grandchildren and all the joys and sorrows life had brought, they had been together. And they would remain together, for whatever time they had left, two hearts beating as one, two lives intertwined so completely that neither could imagine existence without the other. It was a love story for the ages, written not in grand gestures but in daily acts of kindness, respect, and partnership. Written in the dust of Texas rangeland, in the warmth of the sun on their shoulders as they rode side by side, in the laughter of children and grandchildren, in the quiet moments of a life well lived. It was, quite simply, everything. And it had all started with a cowboy, a gentle mare, and a summer of learning to race home,